Here we go. We are live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to WIIL2B podcast with your host.
It's me, Yifa. Hello, everyone. Welcome to What Is It Like to Be podcast. Thank you for joining me this evening. This is episode 5 and number 3 of the Legacy series. And this evening, my guest will be Lerma Rackley. And I will be talking to her about her will and desire to do extraordinary things. Lerma Rackley was arrested 16 times before she turned age 13 for her civil rights activism. At the age of 14, she was sentenced to reform school. She helped to integrate the Washington Star's Newsroom as a reporter after receiving a master's degree from Columbia University. She was seen navigating spaces with famous men like Miami Vice's Philip Michael Thomas and Gil Scott-Heron, who is the father of her son, Rumal Rackley. She became friends with Peetey Green, a 2-time Emmy winner, talk show host, and from his recordings, she self-published his book, his autobiography. She was press secretary to Mayor Marion Berry for both terms in office. In his second term, she graciously and firmly controlled the narrative when he was accused of being a womanizer, alcoholic, and drug abuser. Having a rap sheet at the age of 14 did not stop her from connecting with extraordinary people and doing extraordinary things. Thank you, Lerma Rackley, for joining me. How are you this evening?
I'm good. I might have tweaked that intro slightly.
Tell me what you would like to change.
Well, I probably would have not called it a rap sheet, and I probably would have not characterized the relationships in that particular way.
It sounds juicy and sensational.
Well, I did meet quite a few people as a reporter and as an editor for the Washington Afternoon Daily, which became the second paper only, not afternoon after a while. But yes, I've been pleased to have met all the people I've met in life and to have made all the friendships I made.
I'm so excited to have you because this is the Legacy series that I've been running for the last 3 episodes. And for people who've been watching and some people who know me know that this is my family that I've been interviewing. And the idea of the Legacy series is to understand whether it's nurture or nature that gets people to do these extraordinary things. And so being that you're from my family and I know the legacy behind us, can you talk a little bit about, our legacy and why our legacy is so extraordinary?
That's such a complex question, but boiling it down, we certainly have a number of heroic figures in our biological line, going back to our great-great-great-grandparents who did their part to advance race relations and to advance rights, civil rights for Black people in South Carolina. Your sister and you and my son are the first children in our family line to have been born outside of South Carolina since the 1700s. We have a long history in South Carolina that we can date back to that time, and we have loads of photographs and articles about some of these luminaries. When you and I were doing our little practice run, I mentioned to you that Mary McLeod Bethune, who is quite the noted civil rights activist in her day, an educator and leader, is one of the cousins in our family line, cousins to my grandmother's mother and her siblings. So that's a lovely factoid for me that Mary McLeod Bethune, a feminist and educator, just a powerful woman, is one of our cousins.
And besides Mary McLeod Bethune, your mother was a civil rights activist.
Yes, of course. I was just meaning when you look way back into history, the activism has been on deeply within the family. But yes, my mother was the daughter of people who were civil rights activists and people who believed steadily in promoting the race in South Carolina. And she took on the mantle of leadership with the Orangeburg, South Carolina civil rights movement. And she and her then husband, Jack Rackley, decided that Jamel and I, my sister and I, could take part in some of the marches on the campus because we were so young. But after a while, all the young people more or less demanded that they be allowed to picket downtown with the older people. And after a time, they allowed the leaders allowed that. We had to have lessons first. We used to meet in the basement of Trinity Methodist Church to get instructions on how to behave on the picket line and how not to hold hate in your heart, no matter what might be hurled at you while you were out there walking on the picket line. So for us, the movement was very much integrated and ground in the teachings of the church. Just as with Dr. King and a lot of other ministers who were civil rights leaders, they were teaching all the people to not hold hate in their hearts, and that we were doing this because it was a righteous activity.
So tell us about how this 16 times being arrested.
Yes, well, the adults and the college students would get arrested for picketing, and the young people would just come down from the church with our picket signs on and get on there, and it was like nonstop. They had a plentiful supply of people to keep the picket line going, but the authorities caught on to it and started arresting the children as well. So first they would take away the adults and the college students, and then when we got out there marching with our signs, they would take us away too, and they would let us out. There was, in the first place, they were running out of space to keep people, but in the more important thing, the NAACP lawyers would come and get everybody released. And the people would the very next day get back on the picket line and cycle through that arrest and get back out and picket and arrest and get back out and picket. And it just ended up that I had been through that cycle so many times. The judge, who was quite the racist individual, called me to come before his courtroom so he could say, if you are out there one more time and if you get arrested, you're going to go to reform school. By this time I was 14. And when Mama and I got to the courtroom, we decided to go into the whites only women's bathroom because we needed to use the bathroom. And it was also another act of defiance because the bathroom that was for Black people was one. There was no Black women and white women. There was just white women and white men and a colored bathroom for everybody else to go to, and it was not well kept or any of that. So they actually took Mama away when we were supposed to be going into the courtroom, and the judge asked the attorney for us, where was Mama? And he had to say she's been arrested for using the bathroom, but they released her and let her come into the courtroom. And then the judge said in his super Southern drawl, I love all children, colored and white alike. But if you come before me one more time, you are going to reform school till you're 21. So we left out of there, and Mama was incredulous. She said to our civil rights attorney, Matthew Perry, who was a wonderful man, they can't take a child away from her mother. He was like, yes, they can. So she and I had to have a long meeting to decide what we were going to do about that. And I told her there was no way I could not continue, because my friends were continuing. The adults and the college students had given up a lot of security and their future just to make sure we kept the momentum going. So I wasn't going to be the one to sit back in the face of that kind of challenge. So she and I made a pact. I wouldn't go out on the picket line if she were in jail. She wouldn't go out on the picket line if I were in jail. So one of us would be out to work with the attorney and see about the other one. So.
Do you feel like having that experience informed your adult life?
You know what, I was thinking about that because you said you might pose a question like that. When my sister and I were little, maybe from age 2 for me and from 4 for her, we used to every Sunday go to the gravesite of my mother's firstborn, who you were named for, Ramona. And That was their ritual. Ramona had been killed tragically in a car accident, and their ritual was to every Sunday after Mama got well. Mama also was very badly hurt, but she survived, and through faith and the help of her minister and her doctors, she got back out there, put one foot in front of the other. But on these Sundays, we very early on understood the ritual. We understood that my grandparents and Mama were tearing up, but they were commemorating the love and the caring, and they were honoring Ramona, and they let us be a part of that, pulling weeds from between the stones, and it taught us early on that no matter how difficult something might be, no matter how tragic something might be, you can find the inner strength, either using your faith or using the love of family surrounding you to get through it, to get through it all. So once you've dedicated yourself to something, fear is not going to get in your way, because you have within you and with the love of family, the capability of taking it on and doing what you know is the right thing to do.
And so that's where the nurture part comes in this whole legacy series. Is like there's the environment aspect of it, and then there's the DNA aspect of it. And I've been doing a lot of research on epigenetics and how, you know, things that happen to the previous generation affect then in the genetics the next generation. And one of the most famous studies is on Holocaust survivors, and it shows that their offspring were having the same kind of trauma response from the same trauma response that their parents were having, which was related to being in internment camps, but they didn't have that, but they were acting in the same way, and that was passed down through their genetics, through the DNA. And so I think it's quite interesting to look at it in terms of how do we pass down this concept of doing extraordinary things? Because if you go back into our, history, you said, all the way back into the 1700s or 1800s, and in 1700s into South Carolina. And so you can see we had ministers, we had landowners, we had educators, we had people who were really contributing to society and in very large ways. And so that part, then I would love to have someone do a study on how this passes down, this sort of this drive or this desire to do things. Education is something that was, passed down continuously. We have a lot of educators in our family. We have entrepreneurs in our family. And if you go back to our lineage, you see that. You see educators, you see entrepreneurs, a quest for learning. And so it would just be amazing to have someone kind of do a study on multiple families and see, can you see that through epigenetics? And then on top of that, there's nurture. And like these things that you just said with my great-grandmother and my great-great-grandparents, where they were helping you to understand by their actions that when you have a tragic experience, that you can overcome that experience. And I think that if we look at our family, we can really kind of see that. And I wanted to know what your opinion is, and understanding the concept of epigenetics. Do you think that there is some merit in that?
I'm not sure, because it can also be boiled down to what you see, what your environment shows you. If you're living in a community where everybody's behaving a certain way and everybody is looking after the children and encouraging them to behave a certain way, and all the people are going to the same institutions like schools and churches and grocery stores and doctors and they all have such a shared experience that some behavior would be so out of the norm just by the way you were exposed. Like if you were raised by a pack of wolves, you wouldn't know certain behaviors. But if you're not raised by a pack of wolves, you're raised by people who are encouraging you to do X, Y, Z. It becomes as natural as brushing your teeth in the morning. I think I told you a story that I read about all the schools that cropped up right after slavery ended, with people coming from the north, black and white people, and Black people who had been educated throughout slavery because they had the opportunities, banded together and opened schools for people. And the author of this one particular story I was reading said that she did not realize how little some of her students were going to know about hygiene, because she grew up all the time brushing her teeth and brushing her hair and whatever. So they made a little book up for the incoming students, and they said in the book, these are the things you'll need. A set of sheets, for example, I don't know that they said that, but a toothbrush, a hairbrush, maybe a bowl or a cup for water, whatever. They listed the things that people needed to bring. And a group of girls who were coming from the same town sat together and looked over what they were supposed to have. They arrived with one toothbrush to share. They thought that the people meant they just needed a toothbrush because they had not been exposed. They had been, unfortunately, probably living in some kind of cabin that had no running water and being treated miserably by the slave owners. So once you understand that these are the expectations, you get up in the morning, you wash your face, you brush your teeth, you put your shoes on, you go to work, whatever it is. And after a while, that becomes so inbred in the culture for all the people who are being raised that way that it's kind of hard to separate out whether that is something genetic or is it something learned by experience, because as soon as you're born into the world, you are watching these particular people and learning how you're supposed to behave, and you can pick up some character responses as well. That doesn't mean that everybody who is exposed follows that path. So that's where it would come into genetics, I suppose, as you're talking about, because you could have two children in the same family looking at the exact same examples, and one goes one direction and the other goes another direction. So there's no one answer to why somebody might pick up on the strength that is in their line and why somebody else might pick up on the weaknesses that are in their line, because every line has both.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting because what you're saying, I think about, oh goodness, what is his name? He was the general surgeon during the Trump administration, I think.
Ben Carson?
Carson, yes. I think about Ben Carson and his story, and that his mother was working like 3 jobs, while he was growing up, and she couldn't read or write, past a certain level, I suppose. But she tricked them into believing that she could read. And so she would have them do their homework, and then she'd come home and she would check their homework, but she couldn't read it. She had no idea what was going on. This whole time they thought that she was literate. She didn't get her college degree until after he was well into his career. But all around her, there were people that were uneducated, and she had something inside of her that said, no, this is something that I want to change the dynamics, and then she pushed her children forward. So it's always curious to me when that one person, how does it change the trajectory of the family, of the genetics, of the epigenetics. Another example is, oh shoot, I just forgot. I just forgot that example.
I do want to say, I do think that people are born with certain characteristics, certain propensities at the very least. And so say you come into the world as a very strong-willed child, and if your parents or your grandparents or whoever are your guardians nurtured that streak in you, you might take over the world because you came into the world with that drive and that determination. However, if all these loving people around you died and you had to go live somewhere else, some of that might be tamped down and you might not live up to all the potential that you were born with. And I think people are born with different talents. Some people are born to be a musical prodigy. Some people are born to know how to, like you were, born to know how to put things together without somebody showing you how. Take apart a bicycle and put it back together or whatever. So yes, I do think people come into the world with something, but how that something is received by the people around them and what opportunities they're given to live up to that potential. And that's an entirely different story, which goes to the matter of why our country needs to reformat and make sure people have an opportunity to live up to their potential no matter where they're born.
And so I think talking about the country living up to its, or changing the dynamics of the country, what are you doing now with your civil rights activism?
Well, I'm not doing as much as I did when I was younger, just because I don't have the stamina to go out and join marches and all that. Even though we joined a few marches, Jamila and I both went to the march against the Muslim ban when Trump first got in office, and everybody was gathering at airports and whatnot to protest the Muslim ban. And I went a few other times with either Jamila or other friends to a few marches around that time. But I also do freelance writing for a couple of nonprofits that are working on these issues. And I feel like that's a part of my contribution. And I also give donations when I can afford to the organizations I think are doing great work in the sectors we're talking about, including ACLU, Urban League, some of the Native American organizations that are working hard to attend to those needs. So, but no, I'm not trying to be like at the top of the ticket right now, because I don't have quite the energy that I did back in the day.
Right. I just want to pause here and say that if there are any questions that anyone in the audience has, please put them in the chat and we will discuss them. We would love to hear from the audience. So I remembered what it was that I was going to say. There's this curious conflict that is posed about immigrants, Black immigrants versus American immigrants. And there's this idea that Black people who immigrate to the United States end up coming out on top faster than Black people that were born in the United States. And they have called it something like the immigrant like personality or something like that. And it's this idea that you came from a place and you had the strength, the will and desire to get where you're going. And therefore, when you get there, that push, that drive to get you there sort of helps propel you into this higher status. And and then their children again have sort of like a leg up because they're sort of the immigrant status, and their parents are kind of pushing them. And I'm just curious about your opinion on that topic, because it's sort of pitting this idea that Blacks who have been here our whole entire life can't sort of pick ourselves up by our bootstraps in order to, gain steps in society.
When you say immigrant, do you mean immigrants from Black countries or immigrants in general? Immigrants
from Black countries. Yeah, Black people who have immigrated to the United States are and then become sort of like have a higher status, than.
Yeah, well, that's a kind of minefield, because number one, is going to depend on which place. How did they get here? What were the circumstances of their arrival and all of that? But if you talk about Black people and why some of the oppression has tamped down large groups of us, we would have to go back to the fact that throughout our history, when we have overcome, like at the end of slavery, when everybody was rushing to help each other get educated, and we were founding insurance companies, and everybody was doing churches and schools and home building and towns like in Tulsa and all the various other towns that Black people were thriving in. And over and over and over, those towns were wiped out by the jealousy and the rage of people who did not want to see Black people progress. So the oppression of Black Americans, the former slaves, or even if they weren't enslaved, they're just Black Americans by this time, has been so systematic and so institutionalized that it serves as a humongous barrier that somebody from another country may not have faced through their generations. But that's why I say it depends on where you're talking about, because it depends on if they came from South Africa, they may have been oppressed equally and just as long or something. So it would be hard for me to make a determination without taking it on a case-by-case basis, because you could certainly point to as many people who grew up here and and their parents and grandparents and great grandparents grew up here, and they overcame amazing odds and turned into be whomever, Michael Jordan or Oprah or whatever businessman you want to pick. And all the people who were politicians at the end of slavery before they rolled Reconstruction back. We had politicians elected to Congress. We had every possible thing you could have, and then it was taken away, Lucy in the football style, just completely taken away. And the right to vote was taken away, which, by the way, seems to be an effort underway to do that again. You couldn't own any land after a while, even though everybody was supposed to be getting this 40 acres and a mule. After a while, you had to kind of work with an ally to even buy land. And so the oppression was so sustained, so systematic, so institutionalized that it would be hard to compare what happened to the generations in some other country and what happened to the generations here.
In your reporting as a news reporter and then later on as an editor, did you ever get a chance to work on stories like this about oppression?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I remember I was sent with a white reporter to go to a beach town in Maryland, and we were supposed to see would they rent to a black person or a place, or turn the black person down and then have the white person go in there and see whether he could get the place. And we learned a lot from that. Can't remember what we learned overall because it's been so long ago, but that's what we were doing. We were trying to see where the racism was going to come into play at that particular beach town, because more white people were going there. And the question was whether black people were even welcomed there. Was the dearth of black people at that beach due to the way they got treated when they went there to try to rent a place for the summer or to go into the establishments and enjoy the services. And then, of course, the other black news reporters and I was not the first black person at the Star, but I was among the people that started being allowed to take leadership roles because of the push that everybody was making. We would look through the paper and see racist headlines and tack them up on the bulletin board to call them to the attention of management. And so, yes, and we worked with the union to insist that the next time a position came open on the desk, that a black person would be allowed to be the editor. And they had to go by that because the union had our back, which is, again, a rah-rah for unions, which have suffered. The image of unions has suffered over time, but that was the only way we were advancing, by having the union catch our back to say, here are the numbers. You all have had these positions, and every time you fill it with somebody white, and you got these black people sitting up here, you got to allow the people to advance. Let somebody be an editor. So we actually decided that none of the writers wanted to be an editor, but we had to pick somebody. So we decided I would be the sacrificial lamb. But the editors did not want to do what we said. They knew they had to let a black person be the next editor, but they were so angry with us for getting the union to work with us. They said, okay, we'll pick somebody. So they picked a black guy who was working in the business section. This was a position to be an editor on the Metro desk, so that we could catch these racist things that were in the Metro coverage. Anyway, our colleague in the business section came to us and he said, I know I have not been a part of this Metro group, but they've asked me would I take this job, and I would like to take it, but I don't want to step on you all's toes. We were like, please take it. Nobody even wants to. So he got on the desk and he was an editor for a while, but he hated it. So he came to us and he said,
so why do people hate it? Because they didn't.
He enjoyed the writing. He enjoyed getting out there covering stuff and writing stories. I mean, we did. So anyway, he told us he wanted to go back to the business page where he had been a reporter or an editor, whatever he was. He wanted to go back to that page. So we told him, you got to take me because I'm the only person who's willing to do this. And so by the time they said, okay, fine, we'll take you. By that time I was pregnant. So they thought I was going to refuse the job because it was a night desk job. You had to get there at midnight and leave at 8 a.m. So, but I actually enjoyed it. At the time, there was a press room upstairs where people actually laid the paper out. There was none of the just digital stuff, no computer stuff at that time. And people in the press room were known to not want anybody to touch. You could point to the copy that needed to be changed, but you weren't supposed to touch anything. And so the guys up there were supposed to be such monsters, but they all treated me like a China doll as I was waddling up there with my pregnant self. They were like, okay, just show us what you want. So it worked out fine. And I stayed on the desk until I left the paper as an editor. So
is that why your son is a night owl? Because
maybe.
you were you were awake while while he was in utero. You were awake until the wee hours of the morning.
He was definitely jumping around doing somersaults and what while I was up at that time of the night. So
I just also would like to encourage the guests to chime in with questions if they have for Lerma about her time as a civil rights activist and as an editor, helping to integrate the newspapers. When you were out there, looking at these stories for the newspapers, I'm just wondering what the other white employees were. How were they? What were their reactions when you would post up on the bulletin board the racist,
right.
Headlines and things like that?
A lot of them were our allies. The headlines were for management. We wanted the people on the desk, the editors on the desk, and the management to realize that they needed to take a different tact. Like, for example, they would treat any kind of crime in the black neighborhoods a certain way and crimes in the white neighborhoods a different way. And they would always say, black man arrested when it was a black person, and they would just say man arrested if it's a white person. So just subtle things like that. They were, some of the people did not even realize that was happening. And it still happens to some degree. They'll just say a car accident happened and a man died if it's a white man, and they'll say black person was in it if it's a black person. So we still have to remain vigilant, because communications and media, the outsized role that plays in our lives is very evident and critical to any kind of change. So the more, for example, with LGBTQ issues, the more you see same-sex couples on television, the more it becomes normalized in these stories and whatnot. Same thing with black people. The more you see black people in commercials or interracial couples or whatever, the more it becomes normalized. So that kind of pressure has to be applied to newspapers and magazines, and obviously social media now. And there is so much to keep up with, but it's very important in terms of the image that other people have of each other, because it's based on what they see in the mass media. So
it's important to be seen so that people can, like you said, so it can be normalized and people can feel, oh, that I've seen a black person before in my neighborhood, or I've seen a black person on television. I think just being on television isn't enough, having more integrated neighborhoods and integrated schools. And how was it working for Mayor Berry? Was he the first mayor black mayor at that time?
No, he wasn't. Mayor Walter Washington had been the first elected mayor after Home Rule. When I first started working for the Star, black people were not, DC residents were not allowed to vote for their mayor. The mayor was appointed by a body of congressional leadership. So nonetheless, Mayor Berry was the first mayor who had the intent to force the issue about how many black people would be in positions of power. As an example, if a law firm or a business firm of any sort came to his office to discuss doing business with the city, he would say, do you all have any black executives at your firm? And if they said no, he'd say, okay, well, come back when you do. And that was having the people realize you can't waltz in there with an all-white staff in a city like this expecting to get the contracts all the time. So he actually contributed greatly to building up the black middle class in DC by insisting that talented black people get integrated into higher positions throughout government and throughout the businesses in the city.
One of the questions is, how was it dealing with the pressure of being Mayor Berry's press secretary? And that's actually from Rumal. And I guess I would say, I would add to that, especially during his second term when he was accused of being a womanizer, an alcoholic, and a drug addict.
Right. Okay, so there are two ways to answer that. I joined the Berry administration in late 1979, and before Marion Berry became mayor, he was known for his civil rights activism through SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So I had an affinity for his background because I knew he really believed that it was his job to uplift the race and to do everything he could to advance civil rights. So, but I was a young mother and I did not want an intense job. So he used to ask me often, when are you gonna come work in my office? But I was working first in the Office of Planning, and then I came over to work in his Office of Communications, but I was the Deputy Communications Director. Finally, then I was the Deputy Press Secretary. I didn't really want to be anything higher, but there came a time when his press secretary left and we had to hire somebody else. And I still didn't want to be it. So we interviewed two people and we chose a guy I used to work with at the Star, John White, who recently died. He was a great guy. So he was Mayor Berry's press secretary. I was his deputy. I was fine being deputy because it was an intense job being press secretary. But John finally decided, hey, this is too much for me. So he decided to leave. And the chief of staff, a woman named Maudine Cooper, said, Lerma, take this job. We can't train somebody else up. You've been in this communications office. Like, all right, fine. These are my terms. Give me a telephone, because that was when they were first starting to have cars with a telephone in there. Give me a telephone and give me a pager. And if you need me when I'm out at my son's sporting events, page me, I'll call you back. But I'm not missing my son's sporting events. They were like, okay, fine, whatever. Just take this job. But it was actually not the worst job, even with the pressure, because the mayor listened to me. I think he had learned his lesson from talking to media all just any kind of time instead of routing it through the press secretary. But he was in such trouble by the time he got accused of all these things and had to go to trial and what, he would listen to me. And he would tell me exactly what he wanted to say in a speech or a press release. And I could write it up and present it to him. We could make a few tweaks and we were ready to go. A lot of people tell you, I want you to write a speech for me, and they don't give you any clue as to what they want you to say. But he wasn't like that. He actually thought of himself as having some journalistic experience because he had worked on his college newspaper. So we worked well together, and I believed in him. Walking through the streets of DC with him when he would do these ward tours, people would come up and he'd say, hey, Miss Smith, how's your grandson? Is he out of Lorton yet? And the people loved him because he had that kind of memory. Almost anybody who came running up to say hello to him, he would have a personal something to say back.
Wow.
Last time I saw you, you were at the church. And how is that knee replacement? And, just he had a phenomenal way of connecting with people, and they loved him, which is why he was reelected after having spent time in jail for the cocaine charge. So I was for him. I was in his corner, and I'm glad I was able to be of service in that way.
So the cocaine charge was at the end of the first term?
No, it was he had already been mayor at least 2 terms.
Okay.
I can't even remember which term, because his first term was when I joined the Berry administration in late '79. That might have been his first term, and he didn't get into that trouble till '89. So how we do the math? I would have to look back at my notes to see which term. This is a long time. But I left DC government at the end of 1990, which was the end of that term.
And how did the Peetey Green come into the autobiography of Peetey Green? Can you tell everyone a little bit about Peetey Green and then how the autobiography came to be?
Yeah, Peetey was a radio personality and a comedian, and super well known all throughout DC and beyond, because earlier in his life he used to travel the comedy circuit, and a lot of comedians and entertainers knew him But once he got his radio show, he would also interview anybody of importance who rolled through DC. But he was born in DC. So he grew up with people like Walter Fauntroy, who was the congressman at the time, and Robert Hooks, who was an actor by that time. And so he was able to invite onto his radio and television shows all the stars and luminaries. But he was funny. He was extremely funny and irreverent. He would say all kinds of craziness. He did not go to college, and he would pick at people who had gone to college but were not about anything, not about helping anybody. He worked for an anti-poverty program, and he took great pride in organizing Thanksgiving meals for the elderly and looking out for young people. He had a little group called the ABC group on his radio show, but he would chastise folks who had reached certain heights but weren't reaching back. And instead of calling people who had received the Magna Cum Laude honor at graduation, he called that Magna Cookie Lackey. You Magna Cookie Lackey right here, not helping anybody, thinking you're better than people. I don't have an education, but I'd rather say I is rich than I am poor, and blah, blah, blah. He just talked all crazy like that. And anybody who wants to look at a sketch of his can type in Peetey Green eating watermelon. It is hysterical because he's sitting up there on the camera talking about, you people try to eat watermelon all fancy, cut it up into little pieces, and all you gotta do is pick it up like this here. And he's like burying his face in the watermelon. Very funny man. But he ended up having cancer. And by the time we were finishing up all the tape recorded sessions, he got sick. And so he didn't live to see the publication of the book that I wrote, but I wrote it based on all the taped interviews, and I used some of his funny stuff verbatim. But of course, I painted the picture of him growing up in DC. He was born in like 31 or 32, maybe even 34, because he used to lie about his age. So I had the right age in the book, but every now and then I forget which one of those years. So he had all kinds of funny stories about jumping on and off the trolley, and he was on the grounds when Marian Anderson sang when the Daughters of the American Revolution wouldn't let her in the concert hall, and he just was chock full of stories. And he served in the Korean War, had a lot of funny stories about that. But he was the kind of person who definitely had sunk to the lowest of lows through alcoholism and drug addiction, and pulled himself out of it. He wanted to be an inspiration to other people, to let people know no matter how far down you fall, you can get back up, which is a lesson my heart's throb forever Gil sings about as well. I mean, Gil has a song that says, no matter how far wrong you've gone, you can always turn around. So both of them.
What is the name of that song?
Well, you would ask me that.
Well, so the reason why I'm asking is because Rumal says something about Gil Scott-Heron's song, Give Her a Call. So I didn't know if that was related to what you were talking about, or is that different?
That's a love song. That's a love song. Yeah, no, this other one where he's saying, no matter how far you've gone, you can always turn around. How far wrong you've gone, you can always turn around is from a different song. But Give Her a Call is where he's talking about how he has spent a lot of time in his life kind of running away from responsibility and relationship. But when he gets back to his life, he's going to give her a call because that's what he really wants to do. He wants to overcome his fears of life and circumstances. Yeah.
And I think, you know, when it comes to a lot of people who have addiction, the guilt and the shame, you know, drives a wedge between them and their friends and their family, and drives them towards the soothing nature, or what they feel is the soothing nature of the drugs.
Yeah, and the expectation that they have of maybe rejection from the people. They don't want to be seen a certain way because they don't want to see the reflection of disappointment or whatever that they might see in the eyes of their parents or their lovers or whomever, because people will be disappointed. Our culture is just now beginning to accept addiction as a health issue and not a willpower issue. You know, why don't you just stop? So he had a lot of struggle with that because he was so brilliant, and he obviously realized the dangers in it. He sang about the dangers in it. But if you have an illness, just being aware of it is not enough. Which is what I was trying to say when I was Mayor Berry's press secretary. I wrote an editorial, an op-ed piece in the Washington Post, talking about how addiction should be treated as a health matter. And the Post jumped down my throat. We had this little war going on, but they had more ink than I did. But they were saying, they were saying that it was not a health issue. It was a criminal issue. And so then now everybody is realizing that it is a health issue. I want to go back in time and bring the people who are now dead back to life and say, I told you so. Because some of those editors who were jumping down my throat are no longer with us. But I would love to tell them that they were wrong and I was right. Ha! So
I want to say that one of the things growing up as a child and seeing you, I always looked at you and thought, wow, she knows all of these like incredible people, and she's doing these things that, women at the time weren't always doing. And I just remember thinking, wow, now were you actually dating Philip Michael Thomas, or was that just a friend?
No, we did date for a while, but after that we were just friends.
Okay.
Yes. So we dated for a brief while. He was in California at the time. I met him in New York when I came up to visit Jamel, and I went to a play that Calvin Lockhart, another actor, and Philip were in, and I met him there. And so, we were dating here and there when he came to the East Coast and so forth, but it's kind of hard to maintain a relationship like that. Anyway, if somebody's living in California and you're living in the DC area, and now and then you might hook up in New York or somewhere. So it wasn't the same thing like a long-term relationship like I had with Gil.
Yeah.
But at the time I was not. Gil and I were estranged at that time when I was dating Philip, and one of my friends at my job said, "Oh, Frederick Douglass in history is my real true boyfriend." Okay.
Okay.
So one of my friends at the office where I was working said, "What? Do your boyfriends have to either live in California or be dead?" Frederick Douglass is your boyfriend. Now you dating this guy who lives in California.
I remember when you brought him once to our house, and I was in awe because he was such a heartthrob at the time, when he was on Miami Vice. Yes. And I just remember looking at him like, oh my gosh, my aunt is dating Philip Michael Thomas. Oh my gosh.
Right. Yeah, he was a very nice person, easy to be friends with. And I only have good things to say about him. As a matter of fact, he turned me on to a champion juicer because he was very concerned about his health. And so I bought this champion juicer, and I was making the most delicious juice drinks for the longest time. So I can give him credit for getting me into juicing.
What was it like being a woman during this time, and dating in this era when most often women were getting married and staying at home and having children?
As a matter of fact, things were changing. When I decided to have a child and not be married, the people in the newsroom the white people and the black people were very supportive of my decision. And they used to clip articles out about other women making that same decision. A journalist in the Boston area was making that decision around that time, and somebody came and gave me that clip. And obviously Hollywood ladies right and left were making that decision. Women were accepting the fact that they didn't necessarily have to depend on being in a conventional relationship in order to take good care of their children. It wasn't that they were being poor role models for teen mothers. These were people who had careers, had a bank account, had homes, and they knew that they could take care of their children. Before I was pregnant, I thought I couldn't get pregnant. And I was applying to be an adoptive parent. And the woman who came to the house told me I would have to show what my network was going to be of people who could step in if I had to do a work emergency, or what kind of network would I have. I was like, I got the network in spades, because all of my friends in DC understood my urge to be a mom, and they had my back. So when I had to work nights in the early days when Rumal was an infant, I had him in the newsroom. He slept in the newsroom in his little romper thing. What do you call the little thing that you put the child in? Playpen. I had a playpen for him, and I set it up in the newsroom morgue, which is where they keep the old papers for research. And so he went to work with me every night. And one night we had to evacuate. There had been some sort of bomb threat. And I was standing out on the sidewalk with the rest of the people. And one of my colleagues worked over and he said, "How is our youngest evacuee doing?" Because sleeping on my shoulder. So I had lots and lots of support in that decision. I didn't have to worry about trying to struggle along. And I think if anybody makes that decision, they really should make sure they have the capacity to take care of a child in the right way.
So we're nearing down to the hour. We have about 10 more minutes left, and I guess some of the things that I would like to know is, what kind of legacy do you feel like you want to leave to your children and grandchildren?
Right. I'm glad you asked that question, because you said something to Rumal that triggered a response from him where he said he wanted to be dependable. And I was so impressed with that answer, because if somebody asked me, name the one thing you want to be known as, I think I would say dependable. Because if someone who needs you knows that they can depend on you, that is like a precious gift. So I want to be dependable. I also want to be kind, and I want to be sure I'm always doing something to help somebody who needs to be helped, if I can. So I'm glad I'm passing that along to Rumal, and he has that now. I mean, I heard him say it, and he's going to pass that to his children. And with them, I play all kinds of games that help them think. We play word games, we play math games, we play memory games. So that would be what I would want for them, to be able to think for themselves, to be strong, to be kind, and to be dependable. So their loved ones will know, if you need something, you can go to this person. So, yeah.
Do you think that I'm just thinking back to, my childhood and my grandmother playing Scrabble and being a Scrabble champion, and just having a line of educators in our legacy. Do you think that that's something that that you developed? Also, I know that the church is very important for you. And do you think that having the Methodist Church in your life as a child, and having educators in your life who were pushing this idea of thinking, and by playing games like Scrabble and
Yes.
pushing education, do you think that those helped you to form that belief?
Yes. My sister, in remarks at some program where Mama was being awarded, my sister told the audience that Mama's favorite game to play with us when we were little was conjugate the verb. So she was playing English learning games and thinking games, but she also was the most dependable. If you needed to rely on somebody, she was definitely the one. And she made it clear to everybody who knew her that they could come to her. She was collecting friends just all over the place because she was so kind and dependable. And so, yes, she's definitely the model for that kind of behavior, and a model for wanting to make sure people learn, improve their minds. And as long as she could, she played Scrabble and crossword puzzles and those acrostic things and whatever to keep sharp. Yes.
Yeah. So, do you have any plans of writing another book?
Yes, I would like to write the family history book. And then there's also a legendary nightclub owner and businessman, entrepreneur in DC, whose name was Ed Murphy. I was just speaking with his widow by text the other day, and we were discussing the need for Ed Murphy's story to be told. So first I want to write the family story, then I want to do Ed Murphy's story, and then I might like to do something else with Peetey's story, because I didn't think that the movie Talk to Me that was made out of Peetey's life was fair to him, So I wouldn't mind making us have somebody do the movie based on the way Peetey told his own story.
So you would shop around the book to see if
we would. Especially now that there's so many other outlets. Everybody in the world has a channel, and it's kind of hard to even keep up with stories you might want to see because they're on something you don't have, like they're on Apple or Hulu or this, that, and the other. And if you don't have all the platforms, you might miss out on some of these things, but that does give you a lot of places to go with your projects.
Yeah, it does. So I am so happy that you were able to join me, and this has been such a interesting conversation because, like I said, growing up, I always looked at you as being such a leader for women and sort of breaking ground for women, and I always thought, wow, she's dating all these famous people and. So it's good to speak with you in a different way as an interviewee, as a journalist of sorts, interviewing the journalist.
Yeah, well, you're doing a great job as a journalist and as a mother and as an entrepreneur and as a forward-thinking, independent woman, your own self.
Thank you. Can you leave us with one thing that inspires you?
Inspires me. I suppose my past, my history would inspire me to keep moving forward because we can't give up. We can't relax. We cannot let our foot off the gas pedal because if they could, these forces would take us backward. And so everybody has to get on board to stop that. We've got to make sure this voter suppression scheme of theirs does not work. We've got to make sure that there's lasting police reform. We've got to make sure that the environment is taken care of. Just so many issues. People can just pick one and do that. So if I were to leave any legacy in that line, I would say remain active, remain involved, do something to advance humanity.
Where can people purchase your book? If you could,
sure.
Say the name of the book and where they can publish it.
Yeah, the book is called "Laugh If You Like, Ain't a Damn Thing Funny: The Life Story of Ralph Peetey Green as Told to Lerma Rackley." And a person can buy it on Amazon, or they could buy it from the print-on-demand company Ex Libris that I used to get it out there. And so. Or if they can't find it, they can contact you and I'll send them one.
That sounds good. Do you also do anything social media like Twitter or anything like that you would like to have people follow you on?
Yeah, no, not necessarily. I do a little teeny bit of Twitter, but not often. I mean, like a year can pass before I put another tweet up there. And I'm on Facebook, but I'm like mildly on Facebook because I have some bones to pick with social media. And I haven't sorted out how I completely feel about all that. So no, I'm not getting followed on those platforms.
So people should just buy the book and then wait for the family legacy book to come out, and then the next book about the what was it, a club owner in DC?
Yes, Ed Murphy. You're right. Yeah. I want to write about
okay.
Him. Okay.
Well, let's tie this up. We're at the hour. I just want to say thank you for joining me, and I want to encourage everyone to tune into the next episode, which will be on 6/8 of 21 at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, and this is continuing the Legacy series with Rumal Rackley. And I'm so looking forward to everybody joining me, and bring a friend, bring a family member, tell everyone about what is it like to be podcast, the podcast that is exploring the will and desire of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Thank you very much, and good night.